You were told youth was everything, that the best years of your life would be lived before your bones ached, before your skin folded, before your name was forgotten in rooms you once mattered in. And so you ran. You ran toward pleasure, toward ambition, toward validation. You ran because you believed there was something to reach. But what if I told you it was a lie? What if I told you that everything you chased was designed to disappear? That your strength, your beauty, your desire were not gifts but bait? You were not taught to live, you were taught to serve the will. And the will does not want your peace. It wants your motion, your hunger, your craving to matter. So you gave your 20s to status, your 30s to survival, your 40s to damage control. And now you sit in the silence of what's left. You look at the photo albums and wonder where the man went, the woman, the fire. You think you lost it, but it was never yours. It was loaned to you so you would spend it, and you spent it not on wisdom, but on illusion. You worshipped youth, but youth was not a state of grace. It was a fever. And now, in the cool of age, you begin to see clearly that the job never loved you, that the admiration was fleeting, that the parties, the promotions, the passions, they were moments, not meaning. And you ask, was it a waste? The philosopher says only if you do not awaken now, because if you see it for what it was, if you finally name the illusion, then even your wasted years can become a lesson. Not a monument to regret, but a warning for the time that remains. They told you to make something of yourself, so you built, you competed, you sacrificed mornings, relationships, and moments that never returned. You did not ask why. You only asked, what next? This is the tragedy of youth. Not that it ends, but that it is spent in blindness. Blind to what matters, blind to who you are, blind to the fact that all you believed you were building would one day crumble or be handed off to someone who never saw the cost. They praised your hustle. They clapped for your effort. But none of them were there the night you sat alone wondering if any of it meant anything. And the truth arrived too quietly to announce itself. It didn't shout. It didn't shake. It whispered, none of this will last. Not the praise, not the energy, not even the version of yourself you so carefully constructed. And yet, you kept going. Because momentum has a morality of its own. You did not pause to reflect. You feared what reflection might reveal. Now the noise has faded, and all that is left is the question you never asked. Who was I really living for? Was it for the boss who forgot you? For the partner who misunderstood you? For the children who grew up and now live their own illusions? Or was it for the will, the blind force that lives behind desire, pushing you to want, to chase, to devour? You do not age out of the will. You see through it. And seeing through it is not bitter, it is liberation. Because if your youth was spent on illusion, then your later years can be spent on truth. And truth does not fade. It deepens. Do you remember the version of yourself who believed? Believed in love that never faded, in friends who would never betray you, in work that would fulfill, in ambition that would reward, in time that would always be on your side. That version of you is gone. He didn't die. He was spent. Spent on meetings that led nowhere, on relationships that became performances, on milestones that dissolved the moment you reached them, and now you stand here, not broken but stripped. Stripped of illusion, stripped of urgency, stripped of the story that said, if you just try hard enough, it will all make sense. But it never did, and it won't, because the will never wanted sense. It wanted movement, desire, hunger. And so you desired, and you moved, and you hungered. You believed youth was for living, but you were being used by a system that called you valuable only while you were productive, attractive, ambitious. Now that those qualities fade, you see the truth. You were not loved, you were leveraged. And so the question becomes, what now? Now that you are no longer chasing, now that the noise has dulled, now that the room is quieter than you ever expected it to be, you sit. You breathe, and you begin the task you were never taught. To live without illusion, to love without needing, to rest without guilt. This is the gift hidden inside the loss. When youth is gone, you no longer need its lies, and you can finally ask not what life expects of you, but what truth allows in you. And in that question, your real life begins. The philosopher knows that regret is just another form of illusion, one dressed in memory. You say, if I had known then what I know now. But you couldn't have, because the will blinds those it uses. It lets you see only what fuels the chase, and when the chase ends, it lifts the veil, not to set you free, but to shame you into another pursuit. You don't just regret what you did, you regret who you were while doing it. The hope, the trust, the certainty that if you played your part, life would reward you. But life isn't fair, it isn't kind. It isn't even personal. It is motion, and the reward for motion is only more motion until you collapse. That collapse is not the end. It is the beginning. Because only once you've stopped moving can you finally ask the question you never had time to ask. What was all of this for? And you will not like the answer, because the answer is not comfort. It is not legacy. It is not admiration. The answer is suffering. Suffering you inherited, passed on, justified, and disguised as progress. Now, as you age, you begin to see the truth behind the mask, that every joy had a cost, every relationship a weight, every victory an emptiness you couldn't explain. This is not a tragedy, this is clarity. Because clarity is not joy, it is peace. The kind of peace that does not dance. It sits, it listens, it does not need to speak. And in that stillness you realize something radical. The illusion was never yours. You simply inherited it. And now, finally, you are allowed to let it go. No one told you that meaning decays, that the things you once burned for would one day barely move you, that the faces you couldn't stop thinking about would fade, that the urgency to prove yourself would melt into the quiet ache of having nothing left to prove. They told you to build, but not what to build toward. They said make something of your life, but never explained what that something was. And so you made something. You filled your days. You obeyed your hungers. You chased success, romance, applause. And it worked until it didn't. Until the job felt like a costume. Until the marriage became a script. Until the applause was silent and you didn't care who was clapping. This is not failure. This is the soul waking up. The moment you see that most of what you lived for was borrowed from other people's needs, you cannot unsee it. The philosopher names this moment not as collapse, but emergence. You are not broken. You are outgrowing the lie that said youth would give you everything and that age would take it away. But age takes nothing. It only reveals what was never yours to begin with. And in that revelation, you are free to stop pretending, to stop chasing, to stop performing a life you no longer recognize. This is the dignity of age, the grace of finally saying, I was fooled, and then saying, I will be fooled no more. You thought you were building a life, but you were building a mirror, one that only reflected what the world told you to want. Status, stability, someone to love you, something to show for your time. And now, as you age, the mirror cracks. You see past the reflections. And what's left? The quiet truth that you never really knew what you were doing. You only knew how to appear like someone who did. This is the secret no one tells you. Most of life is an act, an improvisation done so well that even you believed your own performance. You were not selfish. You were trying. You were not foolish. You were surviving. But now survival is not enough, because now you have time, not youth. You have perspective, not ambition. You have memory, not momentum, and those are different currencies. You no longer want more. You want real. You no longer want applause. You want peace. You no longer want to be seen. You want to see. And that means letting go of everything you once thought defined you. This is not a midlife crisis. It is the collapse of a false self. And in that collapse, there is space, finally, for truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be productive, that doesn't need to impress, that doesn't need to win. Just truth sitting beside you like an old friend who always knew this day would come. You don't regret your youth because it passed. You regret that you didn't know what to do with it. But how could you? You were handed a script, not a compass. You were taught to perform, not to reflect, to accumulate, not to understand. And when you asked questions, they said later. Later came. And now you see that most people were guessing, that your parents didn't know, that your teachers didn't know, that the people you admired were playing their own parts. Now you sit in a room that's quieter, fewer voices, less pretending, more silence, and you wonder what it's all for. Not in despair, but in honesty. Because the illusion has collapsed and you're still here. That's the miracle, and you survived your story, and now you're free to write something new. Not something grand, something real. That is the privilege of age. Not wisdom handed down, but illusion burned away. And in the ashes, a man finally sees what matters. No one claps for this kind of clarity. There are no awards for seeing through the performance, no praise for stepping off the stage. Because the world needs the play to continue. It needs you to pretend that retirement is a reward, that freedom is frightening, that stillness is waste. But you know better now. Stillness is the only space where truth speaks. And what it says is simple. Your youth was not wasted if it led you here. Here to this honesty. Here to this unlearning. Here to this rare moment when nothing is chasing you. And you can finally ask what your life is for. Not what it was. Not what it should have been. What it is now. Because now is the only moment the will does not control. Now is the place where awareness begins. And in that awareness, the illusion ends. So you sit, not in defeat, but in observation. You watch the younger ones running, the urgency in their eyes, the hunger in their pace, and you feel no envy. Because you know where they're headed, you've walked that road, you know how it ends. They will chase, they will win, they will lose. They will wonder why joy feels like effort and why peace feels like boredom. You will not correct them. You will not interfere, because each of us must waste something before we wake. And you? You wasted your youth on an illusion. But you did not waste your awakening. And that finally is something you can live with, not as punishment, but as proof. Proof that even if the dream was false, your awakening is real. You were not foolish for believing. You were human. To believe is natural. To hope is necessary. The tragedy is not in trusting the illusion. It's in staying asleep when you've seen it collapse. And now that you've seen it, what do? You do not mourn forever. You learn. You do not try to rewind. You begin. Because this moment, this later moment, this quieter, grayer, slower moment, might be your first true one. No longer driven by the pressure to prove. No longer carrying the weight of other people's expectations. No longer trying to become someone you never needed to be. You are no longer trying to be young again. You are becoming something far more radical. You are becoming honest. And in that honesty, time slows. Meaning returns, not as a product of success, but as a byproduct of awareness. You realize that the greatest luxury is not youth. It is presence. And presence was never given to you in your youth. It was too fast, too loud, too crowded. But now there is space. And if you are brave enough to stay with it, the second half of your life can finally be your own. Now you begin to understand that what you missed was never your fault. You did not fail to live wisely. You were never shown how. You were told to work hard, love fiercely, follow dreams. But no one told you that dreams could expire, that love could sour, that work could consume and still leave you hollow. You followed the script, and the script was wrong. Now you sit in the aftershock, wondering if it's too late. It isn't. The philosopher says the moment you see clearly, your real life begins, not with fireworks, with silence, not with passion, with presence, not with goals. With gratitude for simply no longer being fooled, your awakening will not look like success. It will look like subtraction. Less noise, fewer obligations, simpler days. You will stop pretending to care about what you used to chase. You will stop explaining your choices. You will stop decorating your cage and start walking toward the door. And some will not understand. Let them, because this time you are not chasing understanding. You are choosing yourself. Not the self you projected, not the self others approved of. The self that watched patiently for decades, waiting to be remembered. Now you remember, and now, finally, you begin. You've spent decades trying to arrive at a version of life that finally felt finished, full, and certain. But arrival was the illusion. Because life isn't a destination. It's a series of moments asking to be seen. And most of yours passed while you were looking elsewhere. Chasing, proving, hoping that someone would notice, that it would pay off, that it would all eventually feel like enough. But the philosopher knows, enough is not a reward. It is a revelation. It comes not when the world changes, but when you stop expecting it to. Now you no longer expect your past to redeem itself. You no longer expect people to return with apologies. You no longer expect the old dreams to reawaken. You are not bitter. You are no longer bargaining, and you are reclaiming your time. Not by starting over, but by refusing to repeat. Because the truth you carry now is heavier than any ambition. And that weight, far from crushing you, anchors you. It says, I am done running. I am done rushing to be admired. I am done trading my presence for approval. Let youth have its speed. You have silence. Let youth have its noise. You have truth. And truth finally asks nothing of you but this: stay. You begin to notice how much of your life was lived in anticipation. The next achievement, the next relationship, the next version of yourself that would finally feel settled, seen, sufficient. But next was the illusion. And every time you got there, it moved again. Now you are older, and for the first time you're not chasing. Not because you've given up, because you've woken up. There is no next that will fix what only awareness can mend. There is no return to a self that was never rooted in truth. So you sit, and in that stillness something beautiful happens. You start telling the truth. You tell it to yourself first, about what you wanted, about what you feared, about how long you were pretending. Then, slowly to others. You no longer perform the character you once thought you needed to be. You retire from roles that were never yours. You take off the mask, not because you want to be seen, but because you are tired of hiding from yourself. And this honesty, quiet and raw, becomes your home. You wasted your youth on an illusion, but you won't waste your age on denial. You will not spend the rest of your life defending a version of yourself that never truly lived. You will live now, fully, quietly, truthfully, and that will be enough. You've spent a lifetime trying to earn rest, telling yourself that after this milestone, after this debt, after this approval, you'll finally exhale. But rest isn't earned, it's chosen. And you were never taught how to choose it. You were taught that value comes from movement, that stillness is laziness, that to pause is to fall behind. And so you filled your calendar, you filled your roles, you filled the silence with anything but presence. Now the silence returns, not as punishment, but as invitation. You are not behind. You are no longer running the wrong race. You are beginning the right one. The race where no one is watching, where nothing is owed, where the only finish line is the truth you were born with and forgot. You look at your reflection now, and it is not youth you miss, it is self. The part of you that never wanted the illusion, the part that always questioned, the part that whispered through all the noise, this isn't it. Now you know it wasn't. And from that knowing comes peace, not the peace of arrival, but the peace of return. You return to simplicity, to sincerity, to the sacred freedom of doing nothing more than being exactly who you are, not for admiration, but for alignment. And this finally is the life that was waiting while you chased the one they sold you. You realize now that much of what you thought was love was just agreement. Agreement to roles, to timing, to shared illusions. You confused alignment with intimacy, shared goals with shared truth. And when the goals changed, or the illusion faded, you called it failure. But it wasn't failure, it was clarity. You didn't outgrow people, you outgrew the scripts you both believed. Now you don't want someone to complete you. You want someone who doesn't require you to fracture to fit. And in the absence of such a person, you are not lonely. You are finally undivided. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer explain your stillness. You no longer decorate your solitude to make others comfortable. Because you understand now. This is your life. Not the one you were told to live. Not the one that was expected of you. The one that remains when all expectation is burned away. The one that is not about becoming, but about being. And for the first time, you are not wasting your days. You are watching them. You are with them. You are here, not to chase meaning, but to stop running from it. And that presence, long feared, is the very truth your youth was never given time to know. There is a morning that comes not from death, but from awakening, the morning of a former self, the one who believed, who tried, who smiled through disillusionment, thinking it was duty. You don't hate that version of yourself. You respect them for trying, for holding the story together while it was crumbling, for chasing a dream because no one told them it was okay to question the dream. Now you live differently, not louder, not bigger, but deeper. You say less, need less, fear less. Because so much of your pain came from trying to be someone for everyone. Now you are no one but yourself. And that self doesn't perform. It watches, it listens, it walks away when necessary. You do not stay where you must shrink. You do not argue where silence is sacred. And you do not apologize for choosing peace over presence. This is not giving up. This is returning to the rhythm that was always yours before the noise took over, to the pulse that does not demand, only whispers. You wasted your youth on an illusion, but the second half of your life, that can be real. If you let it, you no longer ask, what should I do? You ask, what feels true? Because the time for strategy is over, and you spent decades playing chess with people who didn't even know the rules. Now you move differently, not to win, to walk away. You walk away from roles that once made you feel important, from identities that only existed because someone needed something from you, from relationships that cost you your voice. This is not isolation. This is integrity, the integrity of living a life that doesn't require justification. You don't explain your stillness anymore. You don't overcompensate for your softness. You let others think what they want, because their misunderstanding no longer defines your expression. You wasted your youth on trying to be understood. Now you use your age to understand yourself. And what you find is not something new. It's something original, something that was waiting beneath all the effort, something that didn't need to be earned, only remembered. And in that remembering, you finally stop chasing. You arrive, and in arrival, the illusion ends. Now you understand why you never felt at home in the life you built, because it was built during a time when you didn't yet know what home meant. You built for survival, you built for belonging. You built because everyone else was building and no one asked, do we even want this? But now, finally, you ask, and the answer is painful, because it requires you to dismantle structures that were never yours. It requires you to say goodbye not just to people, but to ideas. Ideas about success, about love, about who you thought you needed to be. You are not discarding your past. You are integrating it. You are letting it rest. You are no longer demanding it to explain itself or justify the time it took. You are simply saying thank you, and then walking forward, not into certainty, but into truth. Because now you know that truth doesn't need to last forever, and it only needs to be lived fully in the moment you're in. And right now, you are not chasing youth. You are honoring experience. You are finally beginning the life that the illusion never had time for. You spent years collecting things you thought would define you. Titles, trophies, stories that made you look strong, brave, certain. Now none of it matters, not because it was worthless, but because it was never meant to last. Identity built on achievement always crumbles. What remains now is what was always underneath, the observer, the one who watched you try, who felt the pressure, who whispered for rest while you chased recognition. That quiet presence, that was always you. And now you no longer need to add anything to be complete. You've stopped acquiring, and you've started arriving. And in that arrival, you find that life is not about the peak. It's about the pause, the breath between what you chased and what you finally understand. You are not who you were, but you are not broken. You are simply no longer playing the game. You are no longer in search of a version of yourself that only existed in someone else's imagination. This is not giving up. This is waking up to a life that no longer demands explanation, only presence and peace. There's a kind of courage that only comes with age. Not the courage to take risks. The courage to stop pretending that you know what's next, that everything happens for a reason. That time will somehow give back what it took. Now you no longer fill the space with explanations. You let things be unfinished. You let silence stand. Because you've learned that most of life is not about getting answers. It's about outgrowing the need for them. You stop trying to control the story. You start trying to feel it, not interpret it, not narrate it, just feel it. The sun on your face, the ache in your knees, the way the room sounds when you no longer rush through it. This is not dramatic. This is sacred, because everything you once ignored has become everything you now treasure. Time, simplicity, a moment of peace that does not need to be photographed or proven. The illusion was that it had to be more. The truth is, it already is, and you at last are enough to be with it. There is something holy about becoming ordinary. Not average, not invisible, but simple. No longer needing to be the best, no longer needing to impress, no longer needing to justify rest or peace or solitude. You once measured your worth by effort, by how much you could carry, how long you could endure, how little you asked for. But now you ask, not loudly, not with demand, but with self-respect. You ask for space, for gentleness, for time that isn't booked to prove your productivity. Because you've seen what chasing leads to: exhaustion. And now you are no longer exhausted, and you are clear. You are no longer addicted to the fantasy that one more achievement will heal the ache. You are no longer seduced by the illusion that the world owes you recognition. You no longer need to be a version of yourself that only existed for applause. Now you are simply yourself, and that self is enough for the quietest life you used to be afraid to live. The one where nothing grand happens, except truth and presence and dignity that no longer has to be earned. You begin to realize that time is not running out. Time has always been running through, and your work now is not to outrun it, but to walk with it, to notice what it carries and what it quietly takes. You notice how much has been taken: energy, opportunity, people. But you also notice what remains: awareness, a body that still breathes, a mind that, though weathered, is sharp in its silence. And something else, something deeper than understanding: peace. Not peace as the world sells it, vacations and escape, but peace as a posture, the kind that doesn't need more, the kind that doesn't flinch when the phone doesn't ring, the kind that no longer judges the day based on what was accomplished. Because now what matters isn't done, it's seen. The light on the table, the sound of your own breath, the fact that, despite everything, you are here, fully here, and what a miracle that is. Because for so long you lived elsewhere, in plans, in goals, in illusions. Now you live in presence. And in presence nothing is wasted, not even your youth. Because even illusion has its use. It brought you here, to truth. You wasted your youth chasing certainty. Now you find freedom in not knowing. You don't need every answer. You don't need to justify your choices to the old versions of yourself who didn't know better. You don't need to resolve every story. Some stories end quietly, others fade, and you let them. This is the wisdom that age gives. Not the kind that impresses others, but the kind that finally impresses you. Because now your integrity is inward. You no longer perform peace, you embody it. You no longer declare wisdom, you practice it. You no longer seek love to fix you. You let love find you if it must, when you no longer need it. This is not resignation, this is grace. The grace of finally knowing the truth and not needing to argue with it. The grace of letting yourself be ordinary. The grace of no longer needing your life to mean something to anyone but you. This is the final unfolding, not of a hero, of a human, and that, in the end, is far more beautiful. You wake up now without the pressure to become. That pressure haunted your youth. To become successful, to become desirable, to become good enough for some version of life that never truly existed. Now you wake up to a different calling, not to become, but to be. To sit with your morning coffee and not rush through it. To hear your breath and not change it. To feel your body and not wish it were younger, tighter, different. This is not surrender, this is arrival. Arrival into the version of yourself that was buried beneath all the noise. The version that doesn't ask for more time. It asks only for this moment and this breath, this quiet understanding. You lived through the illusion, And now, you don't need to rebuild it. You need only to live without it, with both eyes open, with both hands free, and with a heart that no longer pleads for meaning but recognizes that presence was the meaning all along. You realize now that peace was never something to earn, it was something to allow. But you were too busy proving, striving, hoping. You believed peace came after everything else was fixed. Now you know. Peace arrives the moment you stop demanding life becomes something else. You stop asking, why did it take this long? You start saying, thank you for letting it happen at all. This is what the end of illusion looks like. Not disappointment, but simplicity. You no longer worship potential. You welcome reality. You no longer seek permission. You choose your own pace. You no longer fear being forgotten. You begin remembering yourself, and what you remember is not the person who tried to win the world. You remember the one who longed to simply be, with truth, with silence, with a life that no longer needs to be explained. You did not waste your life. You simply spent too much of it on what you didn't need. But now you have what matters: time, clarity, and a presence that no illusion can take from you again.